welcome back to Women's Biz Tribe Success Summit. I am so excited to introduce you to Jane Turner as our next speaker. She is an author, coach, a must-loved one. She's also a publishing strategist. She's an experienced speaker, sought-after business consultant, ghostwriter. This woman has done all of this, plus authored 4 books herself, including Mindset for Business, The Art and Science of Sound Decisions, and the best-selling Mindset for Authors, How to Overcome Procrastination, Perfectionism, and Self-Doubt. Seriously need that book. Jane has designed a power writing program to help fast track her clients to get that published author status, and that's what we're all after. We're actually thinking, if you're going to write all those words out, you want to know how does it actually end up in that final product. So you're going to need someone like Jane on your team. Welcome to the summit, Jane.
Thank you, Annie. It's great to be here.
Oh, fantastic to have you on board. And I'm super excited to hand over to you now. I know you've got a lot to share with our delegates today. And I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, thank you, Annie. And it's great to be here talking about 2 of my favorite topics, one being success and the other one, the hero's journey. Now, I'm approaching the question of success in the way that I am, because coming to an understanding of the hero's journey as a way to share our stories and really connect with others is absolutely key to success for those of us in business in particular. And the other thing about understanding the hero's journey is that it totally puts any hurdles that we need to jump over to get to that place called success that we're striving for into perspective. So what I want you to do now is to draw on your imagination for a moment and to think of an old-fashioned clock face where we've got 12 o'clock at the top, 6 o'clock at the bottom, and 3 and 9 o'clock on either side. And I want you to imagine a line between the 3 o'clock point and the 9 o'clock point. Because in the hero's journey framework, the top half of the circle represents the ordinary world, with the bottom half representing the special world. Now, don't worry if that doesn't make complete sense to you yet, because I promise you that it will by the time we get to the end of this presentation. And with that in mind, what I'm going to do now is give you an example of the way the hero's journey plays out in the real world, by way of sharing my journey that I went through in the process of writing my first book. So here I am at the top of the clock face at 12 o'clock. I'm just going about my business. And at that stage, I'd been a public servant with the government of Australia for my whole working life. Because back then I was, and to a little degree now I still am, a person who places a high value on security. And if nothing had happened to knock me out of my comfort zone, I would still be working for the government now. But the universe had different plans for me, and you'll be hearing more about that soon. But for now, I just want you to know that I'm still at the 6 o'clock point, at the 12 o'clock point, because I haven't answered the call. And that's the call to adventure that is absolutely central to the hero's journey framework. So here we are in 2009, and my boss sends me off to get some training in coaching, because I was managing a couple of teams of people that we both knew weren't really working to their potential. And my boss wanted to skill me up so that I could take the results that my teams were getting to a whole other level. And something came out of that training that I wasn't really expecting, because it wasn't only that my teams were getting really efficient and starting to get much better results, but also that something got woken inside of me. And I started thinking that perhaps at some stage I could start coaching people full time, because I got a real buzz out of seeing what people can achieve when they get out of their comfort zone and they're prepared to ask for the help that they need. And now you'll remember that I said I had a high value on security. So it's no surprise that I wound up putting that idea on the back burner, telling myself that I wouldn't want to take a risk like leaving my well-paying job until I got my daughter through school, which was several years down the track at that stage. But that idea of branching out started to get up a little head of steam when I bumped into an old friend that I hadn't seen for ages. And I said, "Sonia, you look amazing. Whatever drugs you're on, I want them." And she smiled as she told me about a naturopath that she'd been seeing. And she said that it's a bit hardcore because you've got to commit to going every fortnight for at least 6 months. And I was thinking to myself, well, that's no problem. I can do that, as I raced off home to jump on the naturopath's website. And I'm thinking to myself, well, this looks fantastic. But then my heart sank because I noticed that the naturopath's office was a 90-minute drive from where I lived and worked. And because she was only offering appointments during the business hours, I thought, well, I'd have to be crazy to sign up with her. Because among other things, I'd have to take half a day off work every 2 weeks. But just as I was thinking about looking for a naturopath whose practice was closer to where I worked, I noticed that this one had written a book called The Weekday Diet. So I clicked on the link and grabbed myself a copy. And without ever having heard of a thing called the halo effect, I got to see it playing out because my mind did a complete backflip once I found out that this naturopath was an author. And I started thinking that, of course, my boss would be okay about letting me take half a day off work every 2 weeks for at least 6 months, especially when I tell him how much more efficient I'm going to be when I get my health back on track. And before I knew it, I was driving up and back to the northern beaches in Sydney and Australia, where the author of The Weekday Diet is based. And not only did I get a new lease on life from the point of view of the improvement to my health, but I also got the idea of writing a book to launch the coaching practice that I was thinking about starting some years down the track. So I started writing my first book back in 2009. And in so doing, I was answering the call to adventure and moving past the 12 o'clock point and signing up for all sorts of book writing courses and retreats and the like, and making reasonable progress with the book that I was writing, with the intention of using it to launch a coaching practice focused on helping women prepare themselves to go through the midlife phase. So by this time, I'm hurtling past the 1 o'clock point and the 2 o'clock point and getting some rough drafts of some of the chapters written. But what was happening as I was approaching the 3 o'clock point, which is a kind of threshold that takes us out of the ordinary world and into the special world, is that the little voice in my head that had been quietly nagging away at me ever since I'd started writing my book was getting louder and louder with the old, "Who would want to read a book written by someone like you? You're not an expert. You're not a celebrity. You're not even a good writer. In fact, you're just going to look like an idiot for putting all of this time and energy into writing a book that nobody's going to read." And the kicker for me at the 3 o'clock point was that the little voice also said, "And who would want to sign up to work with a coach like you? You're not qualified enough." Now, that was the one that pushed me over the threshold, because that part of the hero's journey is all about getting into enough discomfort to be open to finding a mentor or a guide of some kind. And somehow, almost magically, a woman called Lorna Stewart, who headed up the transpersonal wing of the coaching course that I'd signed up to do, turned up to usher me across the threshold at 3 o'clock by way of introducing me to, you guessed it, the hero's journey. Now, why this was such a big deal for me is that I got to understand the importance of storytelling, which is a really important skill for all of us to have in business in particular, because it's key to our ability to get our message across in a way that will really resonate with our target audience. And specifically, what I got to see was that I was writing a book like a person who worked for the government would write. The chapters I'd been tinkering with were pretty well written, but they read more like a memo or a report full of facts and figures and devoid of any real heart or soul. So I felt really grateful for the delay involved in getting the additional coach training under my belt, because with a bit more heart in it, in the form of studies, case studies, and sharing my own story, the book started taking the kind of shape it needed to be in if it was going to work as a vehicle to position me as the go-to person in the eyes of my potential clients, just like the naturopath's book, The Weekday Diet, had done with me. Because when I look back at that experience now, it's clear to me that the only reason I signed up with that naturopath, rather than finding one closer to home, was because she was an author. And that hooked me in via the halo effect. Now, the way the halo effect works is because of the assumptions we unconsciously make about people like authors, and what we assume is that they are an expert. They are an authority on the topic they've written about, and they are trustworthy. And we attribute all kinds of other positive qualities that, quite frankly, may or may not be true. So for me, finding out about how to structure the content in my book and the messaging around it using the Hero's Journey framework made it possible for me to use my book to build a bridge between myself and my potential clients. So the point is that this piece of learning got me over the threshold at 3 o'clock, and I came out the other side with an understanding that we are ultimately meant to evolve and grow through our whole life, which is another one of the key messages that the Hero's Journey makes clear for us. And I got to see that the little voice in my head was just a piece of old, outdated programming that I was literally outgrowing as I continued to make progress with my book. And so there I was on my hero's journey, well beyond the 3 o'clock point, going past 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. And at 6 o'clock, we hit another one of those thresholds. And this one is the mother of all thresholds. It's sometimes called the crisis point or the ordeal in Hero's Journey language. And when I think about a movie that really demonstrates this 6 o'clock point well, it's Star Wars that comes to mind. And it's the part where Luke Skywalker is facing off against Darth Vader. And he's not only recognizing that Darth Vader is his father, but that Darth Vader represents the dark side of himself that he doesn't want to own. Now, I wonder if this is resonating with any of you at all. Can you recognize a time in your life when you've been at a crisis point? In fact, there might be more than one time, because most of us have several hero's journeys that we go through in the course of our life. And well, for me, the crisis point looked like this. On one level, I'd been stuffing around trying to write a book for 5 years at that stage, and I'd spent over $30,000 on various writing programs and retreats and the like. And I still didn't have a book to launch my business around. And what's more, I'd just been made redundant. And what that meant, among other things, was that I wasn't able to play out the pattern I used to play out whenever I got uncomfortable. And that pattern was to just buy another course or go on another writing retreat or just need one more thing before I could finish that book. So that was what 6 o'clock looked like on the surface for me. That was the equivalent of Luke realizing that Darth Vader was his father. And my equivalent of recognizing that Darth Vader was the dark part of myself that I didn't want to own was that I had a 40-year history of binge eating disorder that I didn't want to be owning up to, at least not in the present tense. And this was a real problem because I was writing a book about how women can prepare themselves to be well during the midlife phase. And I was putting myself through a program of managing my stress, managing my mindset, doing regular exercise, making sure that I slept well, and making sure that I was eating well. so that I could write about the results I was getting in my book to encourage and inspire my readers. But of course, my dysfunctional relationship with food was a massive elephant in the room. And while I was okay to own up to the fact that I was an emotional eater and that I had a sugar addiction, there was no way I was wanting to write about having binge eating disorder. Because essentially, I was trying to outrun my history, where I'd allowed a toxic pattern of binging and starving to define who I was for decades. So it really didn't matter how fast I ran. I was never going to get past that deep, dark, disgusting part of myself that I had allowed to define me. And I had slightly misunderstood the hero that I was meant to be, because I thought the hero I was meant to be was the one who could say that with all the self-care I'd practiced on myself and written in the book, I'd got to a point where I didn't need to binge anymore. But the only problem was that that wasn't the case. And what's interesting is that just before I got to the 6 o'clock point, that little voice in the back of my head had started saying other really mean stuff to me. In addition to who would want to read a book by you, it was also saying who would want a coach like you, who is so disgusting and so hopeless that they can't even control what they put in their mouth. So let me just leave that hanging there for a moment and say that I know there are a lot of coaches tuning in today. And what we know as coaches is that if we sit in our discomfort and don't run off and buy another writing program or do whatever else we usually do to push discomfort away, if we just sit in the discomfort of being at the crisis point, then some amazing resources might bubble up to the surface from the part of ourselves that we never get to see when we're keeping ourselves distracted with being super busy or buying more programs or binging on Netflix or whatever else it might be for you. And for me, when I had nowhere to run and nowhere to hide, no money to buy another writing course because the comfortable cash flow that used to come into our household had stopped when I was made redundant. And in that place of discomfort, the little voice in my head actually changed its tune. And it didn't say, you're too broken, you're too disgusting, you need to solve the problem with your eating disorder so that you can write about it in the past tense. No, it didn't say anything like that at all. But what it did say was, what if that's not what it's about? Now, I didn't know what that meant, but somehow it got the monkey off my back. And I was able to entertain the idea that maybe, just maybe, even if I wasn't perfect, I was still worthy of believing that I could step up and share what I had to share with the world. And maybe I could help somebody who my story resonated with. And with that perspective, and the unusual feeling that maybe I wasn't actually broken after all, like I'd believed for my whole life up to that point, I was finally able to finish the book. And I was able to see what it was all about when I was standing on a stage launching that book, which is called Thrive in Midlife. Without having planned to do this, I found myself looking at my 14-year-old daughter and her 14-year-old friends and saying, what I want you girls to know is that there is nothing so broken, so unspeakable, or so unlovable about you that you can't talk to someone about it and know that they will still love you and remind you to love yourself. And you know, it wasn't just those girls who needed to hear that message. It was the 14-year-old girl inside of me. And at that very moment, I got a piece of absolute clarity. And what that was that I wasn't put on this earth to help women through midlife, even though I'd just written a book about it. But I was put on this earth to help people to get that feeling that I just had, that feeling of wholeness, that feeling of self-worth, that feeling of the incredible power of telling our story. And with that, I came out the other end a very different person. And this is what the hero's journey is all about. If we take our challenges on, and if we're prepared to step up and do the work, then doors will open up for us. And I can confirm that that person who came beyond the 6 o'clock point, past 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock, and back into the ordinary world over the threshold at 9 o'clock, was not the same person who tentatively started writing a book back in 2009. Because believe it or not, the person you're looking at now used to call in sick if they were ever going to be called on to talk at a staff meeting or something. But the person you see now is not stymied by negative beliefs and is certainly no longer defined in terms of having a dysfunctional relationship with food. I now revel in the fact that I don't need to be perfect to be able to help people. And my special gift is being able to help people to write non-fiction books to either build their business around or to share their story with the world, or both. But as if having that kind of clarity wasn't enough of a reward for me to take back into the ordinary world with me, some other truly amazing things happened as a result of my book being out on the market. Not only was I featured in the media all over the place, but the big one for me was that one day I got an email in my inbox from the organisers of the Women's Economic Forum, who run events all over the world. And the email said that one of our members has just read your book and recommended that we arrange for you to speak at one of our next events. And shortly after that, I was standing on a stage in India, speaking at a forum that over 2,000 women attended. So I crossed that threshold back into the ordinary world, but I wasn't the same person who left it over 5 years earlier. And what's best of all is that I'm able to facilitate all of the wonderful things that happened to me when I finished my book for the authors who sign up to write their books with me. So I want you to stop for a moment and reflect on where you're positioned right now. Is there a calling that you're resisting? Is your idea of success feeling like it's just too far out of reach? Or are you having a challenging time in one area of your life or other? Or maybe you've had a calling to write a book yourself. Now that wouldn't surprise me at all, because sharing our stories is part of being human. And if you'd like a hand with that, I'd love you to reach out to me at writewithjane.com and book yourself in for a complimentary strategy session. And in addition to answering any questions that you might have about how to write or publish or promote a book, I'll also send you a copy of my book called Mindset for Authors: How to Overcome Perfectionism, Procrastination, and Self-Doubt, and the creativity priming meditation that goes along with it. And now, before I finish up, I just want to say to anyone who might have been plagued by negative beliefs that possibly started way back when you were just a child, or in my case, before I was even born, but that's a hero's journey saga for another day. I want to sign off now for you by quoting Tom Robbins, who's the author of Even Cowgirls Get the Blues, who said that it's never too late to have a happy childhood. So I want to say on that note that it's over and out for me for now, folks. It's been such a pleasure to join you at this wonderful Success Summit, and I hope that you enjoy listening to the rest of the speakers. I know that I'm going to.
Thank you so much, Jane. Oh my goodness, what a hero's journey you have had. What a hero you have become. Absolutely incredible sharing. And I just love that progression around the clock. I can actually just see those different stages. And I think, the fact that you, the publisher, took those 5 years of just kind of going, what am I doing here? But then that journey taught you all these truths, and you'd never change any of that now. Imagining you being that shy person who would never have stood up. What did you say? Took days off work if you had to speak, and now you're speaking at summits and in different congresses globally. It's just such an amazing journey, and to self-actualization, really, and you continue on that journey of overcoming real challenges. And I thank you for your sharing today. I'm sure that sharing and the nature of it really resonated with so many people at the summit. So if it did, and if you're thinking, you know what, I'd love to talk about writing a book and talk more with Jane, definitely reach out to her at writewithjane.com. She's also in Women's Biz Tribe. You can find her there. And many people in Women's Biz Tribe are also going to be doing my, elevating your personal brand program. And this is just a great way of actually thinking about, getting that first book, getting that book that represents you and your business. So it's actually a perfect time to be connecting with Jane. So I thank you so much for sharing with us today. Anyone, whether you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, just put your comments in the chat, and Jane will get back to you as soon as possible following the summit. And I look forward to seeing those comments come in. I look forward to seeing you all at the Tribe events very, very soon. Ladies, are you dreaming big enough? I want you to dream big and act bigger. You see, I want to have power. I want to be empowered. Suddenly, being empowered is a more positive word, because I want to make sure that I know my own values, my boundaries. I know what I want to achieve in life. Visible and invisible barriers are only a problem if you accept them as such. So a woman with a big dream also needs to have a plan, because without a plan, that dream is just a wish.
I love her confidence, I love her charisma, and her positivity and her brightness and her color and her lessons about life. As a woman who's been through so much, it was really, really inspiring and really interesting.
I had 4 kids in 2 years. I wanted to be a businesswoman. I had no money. I had to think, how is this dream going to happen? If you actually start believing if something's important to you, just back yourself. Back yourself despite what other people say. Successful people are not held back by what other people say.
I would recommend that for everybody, because everybody should have a dream and everybody should back themselves. So I think she's awesome.
Even when it feels like everything's not going to work, they go, you know what? I'm going to make sure that this does work. I'm going to be positive despite, because it brings energy, it brings opportunity. And as soon as you actually get half glass empty, your vision will start failing. I encourage you to start making your dreams a reality in business and in life. Thank you.